Jacqueline, I just want to say thanks for being here. Thanks for hosting this. We really appreciate the opportunity to get to share a bit. To let you know, as she said, my name is Jake Chapman. I'm the president and one of the founders of SPARTAVets. We are a veteran-based suicide prevention and response training association. So Sparta does actually have some good meaning there. I know a lot of times it doesn't jump out to the civilians. The other side of it is Spartans was the call sign for one of the local units here on Fort Ridge. And a lot of our founders are from that unit. So there has some additional meaning behind it there. But to start with, what I was basically going to do today is give you a kind of quick overview. I'm going to go into a little bit of what the problem is that we're addressing, kind of tell the story of how we came to be and what we're doing about it, and then kind of open it up with the stuff of where we have some challenges, how we're addressing them now, and open it up if anybody has any sort of suggestions or help. That being said, I like to keep these fairly informal, and just glancing at it, doesn't look like we have a whole lot of folk here. So if you have questions, feel free to interrupt, and if not, we'll have discussion at the end as well. That being said, to start with, there we go. Start with veteran suicide is a major issue. I put these two charts together real quick to give a quick showcase of all of the US population. I mean, obviously suicide is a problem for everyone. But completed suicide rate makes up about 2% of the population. And if you break that number down, as you see on the right, the veteran portion of it is about 1 out of every 5 completed suicide is a veteran. Now, by comparison, veteran population as a portion of the US population is actually down. We're currently sitting at about 7% of the US population, and the number is actually declining amongst younger generations. So for veterans of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War that are currently ongoing, it's actually significantly lower than that 7%. And I believe the most recent figure I saw was about 4%. And despite this, these are the groups that are disproportionately overrepresented here. And just to give you a quick overview of kind of how these numbers have been going over time. So this is the absolute suicide rate. This is going back as far as 2005 and going through 2018. The CDC numbers on suicide rates are typically lagging about 2 years behind. So these 2018 numbers came out in November of last year. This is the most recent we've got. Basically as our current wars have kind of kicked off and you get to that point where people are first starting to actually get out and go into the veteran world, these numbers suddenly start to jump up. And by 2008, they've been high. We've had some fluctuation on them, but in general, they've stayed high, and it hasn't seemed like an overall downward trend yet. So it's definitely a problem. It's been around a while, and it's something that we think is really, really important to address. Now, you might also note, because we don't have data from 2019 and 2020, this isn't including data of how this has gone when you've added in an additional factor of the COVID stuff, the lockdown, the increased isolation as a result of it. There's only been one study that I'm aware of that's an early study to say how that has gone. And it was a study of how many people have shown up at ERs at a couple of specific places in the country with suicidal crisis. And that number in 2020, I want to say it was first quarter of 2020, had gone up by about 25%. So we don't know what these numbers are going to look like for the last 2 years as they come out. But I can tell you my speculation, and the speculation of pretty much everyone I've talked to in the suicide prevention world, is it's not going to look good. I want to show you also the numbers for Alaska here. So this quick chart, we've got that red line represents the overall US average, and the blue line on the top represents the Alaska average of how many people are completing suicide per 100,000 residents. So as you can see, independent of veterans, Alaska has been and is consistently higher. We typically rank within the top 2 of the US, and basically every year for the past decade or so, it's been flip-flopping between Alaska and Montana, and it's about 50-50 each year of which one it's going to be is the unfortunate title of number 1. And obviously there's a lot of issues here in Alaska that's unique. We don't have as much infrastructure, just like in Montana. Rural actually means rural here compared to if you're talking about places in like New England, when rural means, 5 minutes a drive to Walmart. Here, we're talking significant logistics issues with it. There's also more isolation. There's a lot of things going on with it. So combine that with the fact that veterans in general are already at risk. And in general, Alaska is at greater risk. And we've got a specific issue here that's quite bad. You might also note here, this one, our state statistics come out a little bit quicker. So we do have the 2019 statistics, and you see there is a bit of an up jump already. And I know like any of the COVID stuff didn't start until the end of 2019. So again, we can't tell for sure what's happening there, but the speculation is pretty strong that something's going on and it's going to be increased. So where do we all come into this? So myself, I'm a PhD student. I'm working at completing my psychology PhD through the University of Alaska Anchorage and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Brock Tucker, one of our other founders, is like the other vet that's in the program. And both of us have some requirements in order to get the PhD. We have to do some community service work. And we had already partnered up on a couple other things. And Brock came to me and said, hey, the suicide epidemic's a big thing. There's these awareness campaigns. And, you know, every time I talk to my buddies, I hear the same thing of people like, man, we need to do something, but I don't know what to do. And there's kind of this sense of putting pressure on people like us that are, you know, in that community and also have the training of like, hey, you guys got to lead the way. You have the training. You're the subject matter expert. And so that was our motivation. And we said, we want to come out and do something. And the way that normally works, the way it's supposed to work for our program is we're supposed to find an organization that we plug into and do something. And so we set out to do that. And we didn't set out to do it, but what we ended up basically coming up with was an informal needs assessment, because as we reached out to a bunch of organizations, there was no clear identified group that is the Alaska Veteran Suicide Prevention Group. We reached out to a number of different stakeholders, and in the process of it, we had a whole bunch of different meetings. So we started talking with veteran groups. And, you know, when we talked to the veteran groups, they were very motivated about it. There was a lot of idea of we need to do something. One of the things I remember we heard a lot of was this attitude of, hey, like, we can't wait for somebody else to come in and save us. This is our problem. We can't wait for the VA to fix it. We can't wait for somebody else to come in and just give us this magic bullet. We have to do something about it. There's a lot of motivation there. And we kind of have that question of like, that's great. What do we do? And it was that same moment they would respond with like, well, I don't know, that's out of my wheelhouse. I don't know anything about it. You know, you guys have this training. Like, what do you think we should do? So the motivation was there, the skills, the knowledge of what to actually do to make that intended change happen was not. We reached out to clinical providers, and, you know, we started with the obvious ones like the VA and the vet center, and the Chris Kyle Hospital had just opened up at the time as well, that focused on veteran stuff. And what we got very consistently from them was they had really good understanding. They were very much aware of the issue. It was something they felt was very important and needed something to be done. And we asked what they're doing. They said, we don't have any capacity to do anything. You know, we've got wait lists out the door of clients that are trying to get in, you know, and that's, you know, you're talking about somebody that's actively in crisis, not getting in to do therapy if we're taking some of our staff and putting them on this. And when we approach them about joining in and doing something under, you know, as part of their organization, you know, we even got like, we don't have capacity to supervise you guys coming in and doing something to set this up for us. So it was very much a like, they thought it was important, but they didn't have that capacity. We reached out to suicide prevention groups. I previously worked at ANTHC doing prevention work. And so I knew some people there. I was able to plug in with there's a statewide suicide prevention coalition, and they have a number of different groups throughout the state that are focused on suicide. And what we found is they are all very aware, of course, of this issue. And they were all doing stuff for suicide, but they didn't have any clear program or organization that was focused exclusively on veterans. They knew it was an issue and it was something they were interested in, and were like very much like, yes, you guys, please come help. So it was kind of this interesting thing where we got done with it and we realized we just met with all these different stakeholders in this, and what we essentially had done is a needs assessment. So it's one of the things that we do with our community psychology approach, is you say, where is the community currently whenever you're facing any sort of issue like this? And as you can see, I have up here, there's a model of it where we start with there's no awareness. Nobody's even aware that this is an issue in the community, and it goes up over time. At the time that we were doing it, it's when there was a very recent push. They were doing the knockout 22 sit-ups or 22 push-ups to raise awareness. And there was a lot of these campaigns going on. And in general, awareness was there. Like when we talk to people, I don't recall ever reaching out to somebody and not having awareness. Usually it was, we reached out and that awareness was there, the motivation of something was there, but as soon as it was, what do we do with it? It's not. So this wasn't the full formal process of actually doing one, but based on our, expertise and basically making an educated guess, the community seems to be in a pre-planning stage at that point. And that meant some action needed to be taken, but there needed to be some sort of a plan. And we hadn't found a home yet. And we had this interesting moment. Specifically, we talked to the Eagle River VFW. And the VFW, and that's the Veterans of Foreign War, a social club and bar that is a nonprofit. And they have a special type of nonprofit. It's not the same as 501c3 that allows them to do what they are. That's a veteran organization. So when we reached out to them, they were very, very motivated about this. They were very excited about it. They wanted us to do something, and they let us know, we can't have you under our banner doing it because our charter says these are the specific activities we can do, and anything out of that, if we do it, we're going to lose our nonprofit status. But what they also told us is, they do a lot of fundraising, and aside from that, they have the bar that they run that generates money, and all the time they have more money than they know what to do with, and they can only donate it to nonprofits. They said, if you guys incorporate, you make a nonprofit, we can give you some seed money. So from there, we started SPARTAVets. We incorporated it just like they suggested. We made our nonprofit, and they gave us some initial money to get things going. When we set up our goals, well, first off, we had Brock and myself that started with it. We had one other veteran that Brock had served with, and there was a particular guy from the Eagle River VFW that at the time was an officer there, and we brought him in as well to kind of help represent their interests. So we have some veteran groups represented as well as our mental health specialties represented. We basically wanted to lead some sort of a centralized effort on focusing on the veteran suicide prevention issue. And we discussed how to do it and kind of started coming up with a plan. And one of the key things that we really wanted, especially from our vet groups, is, they wanted to be empowered to have something that really hits their core needs and isn't just, something designed for something else. And, well, it'll kind of work for you guys. So we moved towards a community-based approach to it. So why a community-based approach? So showed you all those numbers of how dismal it is, how many, 22 veterans a day are dying is the one that always gets thrown around. When you look into the detail of those numbers, one of the things that's very interesting and telling is of that 22 people dying every day, only about 30% of them are actually seeking help. They don't show up to get that care in the clinic. So when we talk about things on like the national scale level, people say, hey, we've got to improve our VA care. It's very important. And, I think it's something that's good to do, but it's actually only fixing a very small part of this. We need something that's out in the community that gets these people. And honestly, this is one of the reasons I had got into going back to school for a PhD after I already had a master's in clinical psychology. Is it's so frustrating as a clinician to have somebody walk in the door and, it's because they just got released from the hospital after a suicide attempt. They've had problems where they've been suffering for sometimes 10 years before they come in and get help. And it's like, oh, it's important and it's good. And you don't want to leave those people abandoned, but you go, man, I wish this person would have showed up sooner. If we could have got there before it got to this point, it would have been a much easier problem to fix. They would have had so much less suffering, and it would never get to this state. So we want something that's out in the community that reaches people where they're at. And I just want to give a quick kind of overview of how we're doing that. And I'm going to go more into detail afterwards. So if you can imagine the classic veteran, and this is the same for anybody that might be experiencing suicidal thoughts, they start to suffer. There's stigma around this, and there's stigma in all communities. I think the veteran community especially has a lot of kind of pride on independence and strength. And so the idea of I'm suffering is not something you want to share. It's something that is especially stigmatized. And they really have this belief of, it's a weakness if you're suffering like this. So it happens internally and you isolate, and people end up feeling alone, and the problems don't get better. And as the problems don't get better, people feel hopeless and they kind of fade until the idea of, I just want to get free of this somehow, anyhow, even if the solution is something that is a permanent solution, is starting to seem reasonable. So what we came up with as a response, internally, we called it Operation Phalanx. And if you guys aren't familiar, Phalanx is a military formation that was used by the ancient Spartans. And it was one that was extremely powerful. It's part of why Spartans had the reputation for being, the elite military that they were. And the core of what they did is they had a formation where all their soldiers came on and they had their spears, and they had their shield. And when they had their shield, it was a large shield. It didn't just defend them, it defended the guy to the left of them. So constantly, if you were there, you were not just taking care of yourself, you were taking care of your buddy to the left and buddy to your right. Everybody together made sure you lived through it. They got everyone through it. And the result was they were a really effective military unit that some thousands of years later, we still talk about. We know who these people are, we know what they did, and we still think of them as somebody that's elite and competent and something really great that appeals to all the military folks. So that's kind of what we use with our imagery with it. But our core thing is we want these people to have that same courage and competence to help the buddies next to them, get the people in the community to be able to do this. And to show you what that looks like, going back to our wonderful comic here, you know, when you see somebody that's not doing okay and you're able to make this connection with them, you know, you're able to, first off, as soon as you make a connection, they're not isolated, they're not alone anymore, they actually have a connection. And that's already something very powerful. You can start to instill hope with them with this. And of course, the final step of this is getting them referred to some sort of treatment. So that kind of gives you an overview of what we're doing. I want to go a little bit more in detail with it. So first off, this is actually in line with the National Council for Suicide Prevention strategy. They have a lot of specific prevention things. This is one of the core ones that they focus on for this community level approach. And the term they use is gatekeeper. So gatekeeper is broadly defined as basically anybody who is regularly in a position that they might be in contact with somebody that might be in distress. So this can be, you know, somebody that is the front desk at a healthcare facility, for example. This could be somebody that just happens to be someone that's got friends that are suffering. It can be a pastor, it can be anybody. One of the ones that I know, like, we love to target is the bartenders. You know, you think of where do people go if they're upset and they're not showing up for help? They show up for other places like that. And having someone in that position that can say, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on here, and, you know, some action is required, is really powerful. But as far as all the CDC studies, they've been very clear. The probability of getting people that early intervention, so getting them to the clinician that is going to provide some sort of therapy and care before they're at that point of suicidal crisis, it's a direct function of the number of trained gatekeepers. And this is very much correlated with the same numbers that we have with CPR, and it's kind of the same approach to heart disease. Usually if I do the sales pitch, like in a room full of people, you know, physically present, I'll do the, hey, show of hands. If I tell you I'm having a heart attack, how many people right now can give me CPR? And odds are pretty good somebody in the room will be able to, because it's common, it's out there, it's something that, you know, many places do. And if I say, how many people know what to do if I'm suicidal? You know, maybe you folks, because you're doing this sort of stuff, but in general, if you reach out to an organization, most people don't. It's not there, and that's part of the key problem that we're trying to address. As far as the studies of kind of how this works, about half of people that have been trained as gatekeepers within the first 6 months alone will have a situation come up where they identify somebody in need of help, they reach out, and they save a life. So it's something that is really important, it's really effective, and that is why we've chosen to go with it. And I have this great quote in here. This kind of appeals more to our veteran crowd, but I'm still going to go over with it. So James Mattis is, he was a general in the Marine Corps. He went on to be a Secretary of Defense for many years. And he is very, very well regarded in the military community as somebody that is smart and very well educated. And like they call him the warrior monk that actually is held up as kind of the egghead that everybody loves, because he still absolutely adheres to those military values. And he had a very famous quote about telling his Marines, you should be polite, be professional, and have a plan to kill everyone you meet, which is a plan for Marines to be ready for combat. And we've seen where they've rewritten this for gatekeepers. And this is a specific group talking about it within military veteran settings. Take that same approach. You need to have an active warrior mindset of this, of I'm protecting the people to the left and right. That means be polite, be observant, and be prepared to intervene with everyone we meet. And I think that's really the core of what we're trying to do with people when we train them. All right, so just to give you a little bit more overview of how we fit it in. So this is a nice quick way of showing there's multiple levels we're actually targeting. The core thing that we're doing is gatekeepers. So if you look at the bottom level of this concentric circle, we've got the actual individual who is suffering and experiencing suicidal thoughts. And what we really want for that person is that there's some early recognition of these warning signs. And the numbers tell us that if we just wait for them to make that recognition and show up, it's going to get about 30% of them. It's not going to get the majority of them by any means. So we need some sort of bystander to see that and make that intervention and help get them to that treatment. So we need something that gets them to that professional care early. So we've taken a step out, the gatekeepers, they're trained to actively surveil. They're trained to do that bystander intervention. So it's not just what to do, but how do they do it? And then they're educated about the local referral resources. For our community, there's a lot of other stuff we can do. We've been focusing currently exclusively on just increase the amount of trained gatekeepers, because it's a very simple intervention that is very powerful. And once somebody's trained, I mean, we do have some studies that say after a few years, they're not quite as good, but it lasts for quite a while, and they've always got that remembrance of it. And it really, really helps that they are much more likely to intervene in the future. And then, of course, on the cultural level, we're always looking at that too. As I talked about with our needs assessment portion, awareness is generally there, but that doesn't mean you stop the awareness campaigns. You always want to help with it, because even though you say in general, this community is aware, that doesn't mean everybody is. And you want to make sure people are aware of what changes with it as well. And in general, we want to get more understanding of suicide, because that's one of the ones too we've seen is a lot of the community is aware that it's out there. They don't have a good understanding of how it happens. And it's one of the ones, you know, we do a lot of kind of myth busting sometimes on people have assumptions that are incorrect. And then the other major one that we really want to change at the cultural level is just the social stigma factors of, you know, people are stigmatized for getting help. We don't want them to be stigmatized like them. We want them to feel open with it. We want them to feel like they can be a strong, capable person that says, hey, right now, I need someone to help me out. But to go just a little bit more detail into what we're specifically looking for with a gatekeeper when we train them. So we've put this in terms of the OODA Loop. OODA Loop, I know isn't super out there. It's something that was actually originally invented as a model by a fighter jet pilot, and it's used throughout the military. Businesses sometimes use it too, but it's essentially this core way of modeling an algorithm of what you need somebody to do in a certain situation. And the core of it is they need to observe, orient, decide, and act. Put it into this terminology, they need to be actively surveilling for warning signs of suicide. So it's a case of a lot of times, you know, most people that are suicidal will give some sort of warning signs, but because of the stigma reasons, what they give isn't usually overt. They won't come out and say, hi, I'm suicidal and would really like help and would like to talk about it, because that's scary. They could be judged. That's a very terrifying thing to do. But they might give hints. They might give little things that are kind of inviting you to ask a question. And even if they don't go that overt, there might be little things that could happen. I frequently use the story of my wife's cousin showed up one day and he had a bunch of like stuff, like a microwave and like random stuff from his house. I was like, hey, do you guys want any of this? And we were like, okay, what's going on, man? Something's up. He ended up not being suicidal. His roommate had moved out, and it was a bunch of stuff that he was just trying to get rid of, and it was like, maybe you guys want it. But that's an exact of something that could happen, and something that does happen is, you know, people start giving things away. So you need people that are actively surveilling and sensitive to it. But they need to decide it's an emergency and actually intervene. They need to know how to help, and they need to implement decision. And I just glanced at my time, so I'm going to speed this up a bit because I realize I'm being more long-winded than I intended.
Well, Jake, I wonder if we could stop for just a minute. We can go over a little, but I want to, sure. Since some people do jump off at 1:30, I want to make sure. Does anybody have a question? That was an excellent overview. Really, I'm so excited about what you're doing and the reasons that you're doing it. Are there any questions? Yes, Lizette.
I'll go first and then Carolyn. So how do you recruit gatekeepers? How do people come to you to go through the training? How do you solicit for that?
Right. And let me jump forward a bit.
Is going to be?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges.
If you're going to do that, if you're going to do that, you can leave that within the thing, just as long as we get to it and I get to see it. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that is one of the challenges we've faced is, you know, the group of us that started this, we have the experience with mental health, and the advertisement marketing and all that is not there as much. And I've talked to many other groups that are doing similar, and it's consistently hard to get people to show up for trainings. One of the ones we've had the best success with, honestly, is in addition to reaching out to individuals, we like to reach out to organizations. And like, for example, we had a veteran motorcycle club a couple of years ago that we reached out to, and they did this great event where they hosted it. They did a motorcycle ride. So they all did their normal ride thing and they ended up back at the BP Energy Center. They did some suicide training and they all did their ride out again together. So it was like a nice fun day. And you know, that right there was like 13 or 14 people we got trained.
Wow. And everybody, and the other thing that occurs to me is like, I love your Eagle River VFW, and I know that there is a really active group in Peters Creek as well. And I was just thinking, man, if we could hit the bartenders in those places. Whew.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Dr. Brown, did you have a question?
I wanted to ask something.
Oh, okay. Yes, please.
First off, thank you so much, Jake. I am a veteran too, and this is something near and dear to my heart. I have a platform called Call Doctor. I'm just going to put this out right now. I'm going to dedicate whatever resources I can provide off this platform. Jacqueline, you can maybe share with Jake, but I'm extending right now to SPARTAVets. I want to get involved with you all. I have a very unique platform for, I'm actually connected to 22 of the 23 emergency departments through Providence Hospital. And I'd like to extend that. I want to develop a way we can get people, I can put a specific amount of people on this, but I'll talk with you about that. But I'm doing that as of right now, acknowledging you and to help your organization.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to hear that, and absolutely thrilled to be working with you on it in the future.
Great. One last thing I've already discussed with the Alaska Mental Health Trust. They actually really like what we could potentially do, and veterans were part of that. So let's get together as soon as possible. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Wow, I think that's a first on Health Ties. So thank you very much. I feel like some kind of event coming on. So thank you very much.
Great.
All right, I'm going to go back. Thank you, Sam, and I'll connect you if that's okay, Jake.
Yes, please do.
Dr. Brown, did you have your question?
Yes, thank you. I had two very quick questions. Of the population in Alaska, what % are veterans? The first question. The second question is, as you've talked to veterans who attempted suicide, did not complete it, but you go back and you try to find out what was in their mind, have you identified the major needs of the veterans? Not what some agency thinks the needs are. What do the veterans say their needs are? Those two questions.
Yes, thank you. Good questions. So first of all, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. It's approximately 1 in 5 are veterans. I want to say 17 or 18%, somewhere around there in Alaska. We have one of the highest rates of veteran populations. It is extremely high, though. And as far as what their kind of core needs are, yes, so there's been a lot of research done on that. And then I've also done clinical work, so I have the firsthand experience as well. I can tell you the biggest risk factors that usually come up is a sense of people are suffering and they want an escape for it. It's not that they want to be dead, it's they want to not suffer. And what tends to happen over time is there's this buildup of like, hey, there's this rough idea of like, well, if I just wasn't here, if I didn't exist, it would stop being an issue. And usually when people first have that thought, it's a scary thought and they don't immediately engage in it. There is a profile of people that are more impulsive. Usually it involves either like some sort of cognitive dysfunction or else commonly substance use to increase impulsivity that will do it much, much quicker. But generally speaking, most people struggle with it for quite a while. And in the process, they kind of normalize, they get exposure to the idea and it stops seeming so scary as they engage with it more. And they start to kind of go through this process where they get into like, how would I do it? And they get through all that. But the core like risk factors we see, the biggest ones are isolation, perceived isolation. It doesn't have to be real as long as they feel isolated, and hopelessness. And then the third one that's not quite as strong, but still is the top 3 by far, is being perceived as a burden. And it comes out a lot nationwide. One of the highest groups overall is elderly males. And it tends to have a point, especially once they get to the point of healthcare burdens and they feel like they're a burden on their family, it starts to look more appealing to them. And it's one of the ones that really comes up in that profile. And that directly applies with the veterans. Now, if you're talking about specifically the veteran unique ones, to make sure I'm answering it thoroughly, the profile of where they have the most of the issues, generally speaking, it's usually the people in the first 3 years after transitioning out of the military. So it's during that transition period. And one of the cultural things that's very different is, in the military, You are very much shaped and trained to have this idea of it's mission first. I'm going to put my needs second. And it works very functionally in the military because within that context, you always have a first line supervisor whose job is to answer for your health and well-being. And they are very involved in your business, and they will sit there and say, my soldier has this problem. I'm going to tell you, like, go to sick call. And the idea of the way it kind of works in that culture is the soldier's going, no, I'm tough, I'll do with it. And the boss says, no, you're getting your butt over there. You go get taken care of because I need you to be, ready to go. And that kind of functions really well. Well, take that same person that's, very much acculturated to that, put them back in the civilian world where your boss doing that level of interaction with you would be a breach of your healthcare privacy and like absolutely unwelcome. And they haven't adapted to it. And now they're suffering. And a lot of times they've just moved. They don't always move out of the area, but a lot of times they do. And so they're isolated from their peer support group. They don't have that same social intensity of, I served my 4 years and I got out. And for me, it was like all the single soldiers, we were always doing something together after work. And there was things going on. And then you get out and like, there's nobody doing that same stuff. And it's a lot of filling up time and just being there. So I think that's one of the other major ones. And I could answer far more at depth, but I think that's probably enough for now.
Thank you very much.
And Jacqueline, it looks like you're talking, but still muted.
Muted. Yeah, I'd say I'm going to do one last call for questions, and then you'd be welcome, Jake, to continue on with your slides. So one last call.
I do have one question. Who is the most ideal? I'm sorry, let me back up. One of the challenges you identified is reaching rural Alaska. How can we support a connection to rural Alaska? And I asked that in follow along. Who are the most ideal candidates or entities to make those introductions to you?
Right. And the answer to that, so there's a lot of logistics issues with going to rural Alaska. And so there's a few different ways to go about getting the training there. You either have to have a trainer that shows up and provides the training, or else you have to have somebody there within the community that is trained up as a trainer and can provide it. And what we've actually been going for, and I'll go ahead and briefly throw this slide up that I'll get to, is we're trying to create an online version of our SPEAR training specifically to hit those rural Alaska needs. And it will also hit some other needs as well, because one of the things we often find is people are motivated when you talk to them and you get them signed up for a training in a month and a half. And by the time they actually get to that date, they might not still have that same motivation. So we can get them trained right then. But if we do it that way, that's one of our core approaches. That being said, I'm very open to anything else. One of our kind of limitations that we've had currently is at the start of this, we started small. We started as just a couple guys basically doing this and providing some of the training. So we hit the point where we said, well, we either need to, this is either all we're ever going to be, or else we need to try to grow and spend the time with it. So we've been in the process of trying to grow, but we're not there yet. I kind of been using the analogy of that crawl, walk, run, where we're into the walk phase now, and we're very excited to try to get to the run phase as quick as we can.
Thank you.
So afterwards, I can connect Jake and Cindy together, and maybe you can further have those conversations. Maybe there's health clinics or some place that could have a training that could have a central site and a coordinator, just an idea. But all right, go ahead, Jake, and continue, and we can do more questions afterward.
Okay, and I'm just going to say in advance, thank you for anybody for being here. If you have to jump off, and I apologize for going a little longer than intended. And I'm going to jump back in it. So to let you know what we do that's a little bit more unique, we plugged in with the Suicide Prevention Council. That's a statewide council of a number of groups that are doing suicide prevention. And when we first ran it through our stakeholders, they all use the QPR training, which is a gatekeeper training. And it's 1 to 2 hours worth of a training. So it's a relatively short one. And when we had some of our veteran stakeholders show up and do it, the feedback we got was very consistent, that they felt it was a lot of knowledge based, and it was a lot of kind of the academic side of understanding it. And then they're like, but when I see it out there, what do I do? And they don't know still. And a lot of the military approach to training is very skills oriented. I'm going to give you the basics of it. I'm going to run you through it by the numbers, and you're going to do it. And then you're going to be more prepared to do it. And with my psychology background, that's good behaviorist training too. Of, if you want someone to do a behavior, you get them to practice that behavior. So that was something that we decided we want to do our own training and incorporate And that just gives you a little bit about what's unique. One of the questions we get a lot is, is our stuff appropriate for non-veterans? And the answer is we hit all the core stuff there for Gatekeeper. So how we go about doing it kind of fits in with the military culture. We use some analogies that are very veteran based, but the core of what we're talking about is the same. And I mean, we frequently have people that are showing up for our trainings that are not themselves a veteran, and they're not necessarily targeting veterans, but they just want to be knowledgeable about suicide. And it does absolutely hit that goal. We also do a little bit, especially we tend to tailor our training. So like, for example, one year we got invited in to train the BHAs, that's the behavioral health aides, which is through the tribal health system. That is a low-level practitioner person that in most communities is the only person available there. And we were able to give them training on it. And they already had a lot of training in mental health and suicide. So we spent a lot of time training them on, here's the extra unique things that are there for veterans and the extra unique concerns. And so that's always something we're willing to do and able to. And this just kind of gives you a quick overview of what our core objectives are. This pretty much maps in with where I showed you the core things you need a gatekeeper to do. You want them to understand it. You want them to recognize it. You want them to have an understanding of the importance of the gatekeeper intervention, because having that is what motivates people to actually make that decision of, I'm going to intervene in this situation, and I'm willing to do that risky moment of scarily talking to a friend, a colleague, a stranger, whoever, and say, hey, are you feeling suicidal right now? But then we actually teach them how to do it. How do we get them to share? How do we do the empathizing? And there's quite a bit with that piece covered. And then lastly, we tell them, how do you assess the level of risk? And the core that we're looking at for them is we don't try to tell the people we're training they're going to be the end all be all. We kind of do just like the CPR. Their goal is to do that immediate first aid and intervention, and to get them to higher levels of care. And to do that, they need to know of, hey, is this somebody where I can try to encourage them to, call one of the local clinics and get on the wait list for some, outpatient therapy and maybe some medications? Or is this somebody that I need to drive them to the ER and get them in immediately and not leave them alone? And so we kind of just do that low risk versus active crisis. And that goes into, I kind of already covered a little bit about this, but one of our successes is, when we started this, none of us are paid. We don't give ourselves any paycheck from it. And we made a point to keep our costs as low as possible by volunteering time. So we've been able, we had suspended the operations for 2020 due to lockdowns and having trouble, even when we tried to work through them, getting people to show up. But we have historically done free trainings locally. We're about to start them up again quarterly. That's just open to the public and anyone can do, as well as then trying to advertise with specific groups and get their groups to come in and train the whole group. I think as an organization compared to other people, because we've got people to volunteer their time, we've got the BP Energy Center is one that we use frequently that volunteers a venue. We keep it extremely cheap. It costs us about $11 to train a single person. And the majority of that is in some of the handouts. And we give some really nice wallet cards that are lacquered and will actually fit in your wallet, that has kind of your cheat sheet. So once somebody's trained in it, they can throw it in a wallet, forget about it. And if it's, 4 years from now, they have a situation come up, they go, oh, what do I do? They can pull us out and immediately pull out a nice little fold out that gives them the core things. And they'd be like, oh, right. And of course it has the resources on them for, hey, here's the number to call the suicide hotline if you need help. And as we started to address, populating trainings is always difficult. One of the things we've had some success with is we've recruited people that volunteer with us and help populate trainings. They'll get one done. And what kind of tends to happen is we kind of exploit their network, and then the people that they can get that are in their immediate network that they know have shown up. And from there, we don't get a whole lot more from them. It's kind of the same thing of if you're hitting the same groups again and again, you've already got the people that are willing eventually. Reaching rural Alaska has been a challenge for us. And in general, it's one that we're trying to get better on. That online training is one of the core things. And our limited manpower has been the other big one. And this is one of the things that's been our targets for change now, is because we are trying to grow, we are moving to a model of actually having paid employees, or paid volunteers rather, to try to make this more feasible. Currently, it's the case of the primary two of us that are doing this are both still completing our dissertations. I've got kids, I've got a family life. We also have to work to actually get some income. And the reality of that is this is something that is potentially the first to get axed when the schedule gets busy. And likewise, with two of us doing the majority of the work, we have some limitations. So as I said, expanding and stability, and the other thing is outreach and fundraising. We haven't, I don't know that we're necessarily bad at fundraising as much as we just haven't done it a whole lot yet. In part because we've been very successful at doing a lot very economically. And that was our initial goal when we set out, was to just keep it as economic as we could. And now as we're trying to expand more and say, hey, we're really doing it. What I've been pushing for with our board is trying to get like a paid coordinator position that is the set go-to person that can do this stuff, and basically move some of that kind of stuff off of mine and Brock's plates so that we can go back to focusing on the prevention stuff. And I think that'll make us more effective. But to do that, we need fundraising. So now we're starting to ramp it up, and we're going through the learning curve. And that being said, and this is where I'm really kind of putting it forward of things that we're looking for from the community is, for currently, we're in the process of developing our online version of the SPEAR training. This is another one we're trying to do, rep off some of our fundraising, because currently we're doing it in-house, and we're trying to do our video editing, where we're trying to do all of the hosting on the website stuff. And this is a bunch of specialized knowledge that's a little bit outside of our expertise. So we're kind of fumbling through it, and what we'd really like to do at this point is get the money behind it to get people that are experts to do those pieces. And I think the result will be both faster and a better quality product. Likewise, we're always looking for more partnerships. I'm really excited. It sounds like we've already got somebody today, and I'm very, very thrilled about that. And even at the lowest level, like if any of you have organizations where you think this would be beneficial to have your people trained, we would love to come in and do a training with you guys. And we're happy to always tailor it to your needs. That's constantly one of the things we're looking for. Yeah, and likewise, we're always looking to connect with more resources. We're looking for, basically more funding opportunities. We've recently, we've been partnering with the Foraker group, who everybody's kind of recommended us as the go-to for, we're a nonprofit that wants to grow. They're the people to go to. And we've been starting to go for some of the grants. We're at the point where we're ready to go for some of the bigger grants and start to really get things rolling, I think. But that being said, we're always looking for more opportunities with that. And if anybody is aware of anything, and we're also always looking to partner, any sort of partnership that can come up where we have, shared interest. We are very open to it. And if people have just experience on growing something like this, I'm always looking for mentors.
So I'm going to say at that point, if anybody that wants to put their contact information in the chat, go ahead. You can reach out to me if you like. It looks like go ahead, Jake, and wrap up, and we can maybe ask questions one more time. So go ahead.
Yeah, and this was just my last slide here, is just contact information where you can get in contact with us. That sparta.vets@gmail is our best contact. It forwards to all of us that's involved, so somebody will get back to you pretty quick with that. And of course, you can always check out our website and see some great stuff there.
Awesome.
And yeah, I guess at this point, I'm going to open it back to questions. I know we already took a few.
Yeah, it's awesome. First of all, thank you. Thank you for your hard work and for all the thought and process that you've put into this. Sam, did you have one more thing that you'd like to say to Jake?
I just want to say thank you, brother, for taking care of those vets. That's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What a blessing. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you, Sam. And so I'll just say going once, going twice. Any final questions or anything? Lizette, any final questions? No? Okay. Well, you have contact information there for Jake. You can always reach him through me as well. I want to thank you all of you who stayed on. This is really a wonderful project that you're working on, and you have reached out actually to the right people. I think that we can support you, and Health Tie has nothing but wonderful things to say about Sultana and Foraker. So let's just keep this conversation going, and thank you very much, Jake. It's truly appreciated.
Thank you, Jacqueline, again for putting this together. I just want to say this has been really awesome. Thank you.
Was there one last question or one last thing? Nope. Okay, well, thank you all, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for Health Tie Open Innovation. It's awesome to see you all, and have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. So take care and goodbye.
Take care.
Again, thanks, Jacqueline and Jake.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, goodbye now.